They always came in the small hours, in the deepest, darkest part of the night. He slept well, mostly, but on those nights he would wake, disturbed by their presence, the whispers, the whisperers. The voices he could barely hear, but which filled every space in the room. Beneath the bed, in the windows, echoing down the long unused chimney into the fireplace. The voices that had woken him and that would remain with him till daybreak. If the voices had been there every night, it would have been unbearable, but they came only occasionally, perhaps once every few weeks. There had been times early on when he'd thought they had finally ceased, when the gap had increased to a month, 2 months, sometimes even 3. He had thought that finally he was free of whatever condition or curse this might be, but then, for no evident reason, they'd returned, as overwhelming and insistent as ever. He could barely recall when this had begun. He had no clear recollection of the first time it had occurred. All he knew was that there had once been a time, a decade or more before, when it had not been part of his life. Now it seemed it always would be. He had never worked out what made them come, what prompted them to begin their insistent whispering. There was no warning, no obvious trigger. They just came. Sometimes he thought the occurrences were becoming more frequent. At other times he thought they might be diminishing. The truth was he had no idea. There was no pattern, no sequence. In some respects that was the most disturbing part. He was accustomed to recognizing patterns, to identifying relationships and connections. It was what he did. Taking a range of apparently unconnected data and phenomena and translating it into meaning, drawing the lines on the chart to explain why this alignment of stars and planets informed the sequence of human events, explaining why the coincidence of your birth at some random point determined the person you were and the life you could expect to lead. He ought to be able to make sense of this. He should be capable of finding some correlation that would explain why this was happening, and what it might be telling him about himself, or his life, or his future. For all his efforts, he could find nothing. Just temporal white noise. As far as he could tell, the whisperers came randomly. There was nothing he could do even to predict their arrival, much less prevent it. All he knew was that once the whisperers came, there was no point in trying either to ignore or fight them. If he tried to return to sleep, the whispers would still be there, insistent as ever, not quite inside his head, not quite outside it. If he tried to close his ears to the sound, it would seem to grow, not louder, he thought, but somehow more present, more invasive. There was no solution other than to get up, go downstairs, busy himself with something else, something that required a degree of attention, though he knew from experience that the whispering would not allow him to focus on anything too demanding. The whispering wouldn't cease, not tonight, not until the first light of morning was filtering through the blinds downstairs. He dragged on his dressing gown and stumbled downstairs, pausing in the kitchen to make himself a mug of coffee. He was resigned now to no further sleep before morning, and made his way to the corner of the living room he used as an office. There were a couple of charts he was working on for clients. It was work that required some concentration, but which, after all these years, he could carry out even when his mind was partly elsewhere. The whispers were quieter down here, or at least a little less insistent, but they were still there, still telling him something he couldn't quite discern. He was accustomed to this by now, knowing he would be capable of focusing on the work.